Democrats seem to be having this debate whether or not Maher Mamdani is a socialist or a democratic socialist. Let me settle it. He's a straight-up communist. How do I know this? Well, I'm reading between the lines when one of his major advisors says, elect more communists.
That is the entire warning, right there. Ma is not claiming people should be barred from holding extreme views. He is saying, stop acting like voters are too naive to understand what they are actually hearing. And honestly, that is the piece Democrats need to worry about. Because when someone says, elect more communists, ordinary people do not hear affordable housing.
I am in support of abolishing ICE, and I'll tell you why. Because what we see is an entity that has no interest in fulfilling its stated reason to exist. We're seeing a government agency that is supposed to be enforcing some kind of immigration law, but instead what it's doing is terrorizing people, no matter their immigration status, no matter the facts of the law, no matter the facts of the case. And I'm tired of waking up every day and seeing a new image of someone being dragged out of a car, dragged out of their home, dragged out of their life. What we need to see is humanity. And there is a way to care about immigration in this city and in this country with a sense of humanity. What we're seeing from ICE is not it, and we have not seen that from them in a long...
Pause right there, because this is where emotional framing carries most of the weight. Nobody wants to watch chaotic enforcement play out on screen. Nobody wants brutality. But jumping from the system needs fixing. To abolish the enforcement agency is not a minor adjustment. That is not a small correction. That is yanking out the safety mechanisms and rebranding it as kindness. And that is precisely why this style of politics becomes so costly for Democrats nationally. Local progressive organizers may applaud it. Cable news panels may agree, but ordinary voters hear abolish and immediately wonder, so who actually enforces immigration law? And if the answer is basically feelings, hashtags, and a city council session, that is not going to resonate beyond the base. This is where the party keeps tripping over the same obstacle. They take an issue people might genuinely care about, wrap it inside the most extreme possible framing, and then seem surprised when voters pull back. And before we continue, hit like and subscribe because this gets even more telling once housing, homelessness, and Ma's full warning enter the conversation.
I'll say to your first question that, just to put it very clearly, these are programs for every single New Yorker. These are not programs that are going to ask the immigration status of any one of the children. All of those children are New Yorkers. They should all be enrolled in pre-K and 3K, no matter where they were born or where they come from. And we are also proud to be a sanctuary city. What a sanctuary city means is that we have policies in place, policies that have existed for years in this city, that deny ICE agents access into schools, hospitals, city properties, or even the properties of city contractors, unless those ICE agents can present a judicial warrant signed by a judge. We know that the vast majority of the time, ICE agents are not presenting that kind of documentation. If they're presenting any documentation, it tends to be an administrative warrant, and oftentimes there isn't any documentation even provided.
This is the gentler version of the same argument. It sounds more compassionate. It sounds more refined. It sounds like we are simply defending children and families. And look, nobody wants kids used as political tools. That is not the real debate. The real debate is what happens when every serious enforcement tool gets framed as a humanitarian crisis. At some point, sanctuary policy stops functioning as protection for vulnerable people and starts becoming a direct challenge to whether federal immigration law holds any meaning at all. That is the tension voters actually recognize. The left frames it as decency. Critics say it is about dismantling enforcement while refusing to admit it. And Ma's point is that Democrats cannot keep avoiding the obvious. If the policy is extreme, stand behind it. If the ideology is socialist, say so plainly. But do not sell the public a revolution while calling it basic governance.
It matters that the mayor stands by, and so I assume stands with, someone who says things like, if you don't believe in the government's sacred right to seize private property, it's over. Seize private property. Home ownership is racist. Elect more communists. Private property, especially home ownership, is a weapon of white supremacy. Really? Even among the 20 million Black Americans who own their own home?
That line lands hard because it cuts straight through the academic noise. Home ownership is racist may sound provocative in a university lecture, but say it in front of a family that worked 2 jobs for 2 decades to buy a house and watch the reaction. For most Americans, owning a home is not some dark symbol of systemic harm. It is security. It is grounding. It is the thing your parents hoped for. It is the thing people give up comforts to achieve. So when political activists start framing private property as the enemy, people do not hear justice. They hear a threat to what they built. And this is the deeper flaw with revolutionary language. It always begins with the wealthy. It always begins with billionaires. It always starts with just the bad actors. But somehow, at the end, the middle class ends up carrying the cost.
These are the kind of utterances I might forgive as something a dumb white girl said while she was at Bryn Mawr. Because it's the kind of privilege hating you can only learn for $95,000 a year. But these are statements made as an adult. Yes, for co-eds from elite private colleges, you're only a lesbian until graduation, but the communism lasts a lifetime.
Ma delivers it as a joke, but beneath the humor is a genuine political observation. Much of this language does not actually sound like working-class politics. It sounds like elite guilt dressed in revolutionary clothing. That is why it can feel so strange. The loudest anti-capitalist voices often come from people who discovered oppression at a school with a rock-climbing wall and a dining plan. Then they move into politics and begin telling everyone else that their personal ambitions are morally questionable. Meanwhile, the average voter is not sitting around analyzing Marxist frameworks. They are focused on rent, groceries, schools, public safety, taxes, and whether their street still feels like home. If your response to all of that is seize private property, do not be shocked when they walk away.
And this is the pendulum never lands in the middle problem I'm always bitching about. Really, the choices we get here are either the worst version of crony capitalism or communism, either a side deal for the Trump family every time he does business overseas, or the lady who says, impoverish the white middle class. Oh yeah, there's a great campaign slogan for you. Honestly, as New York mayoral races go, I was less creeped out by Anthony Weiner's.
That is classic Ma. Challenge everyone, draw fire from both sides, and somehow arrive at the point, because he is correct about the pendulum. Voters are frequently not being offered reasonable choices anymore. They get corruption on one end and ideological fantasy on the other, and the middle is sitting there asking, can we just have functional government? Can we address problems without converting the city into a political theory experiment? That is the space Democrats keep leaving open at their own expense. Most people are not demanding crony capitalism, but they are also not demanding communism with a rebrand. They want safer neighborhoods, housing they can afford, decent schools, and a government that does not treat every challenge as a reason to grow its own authority.
Mayor, I wondered if you could indulge me for a second.
So I took the problem to the mayor himself, showing him video of people camped on the street in such frigid weather.
What is your office going to do about it? And is it acceptable, given the fact that it's 21 degrees, for these people to be there on the street, on the Upper West Side, and getting...
Now we shift from theory to lived reality. This is where every ideology has to leave the studio and step outside in January, because homelessness is not a concept. It is not a talking point. It is not something you resolve with a yard sign. Reading housing is a human right. It is people freezing on sidewalks, residents feeling forgotten, businesses struggling to survive, and city officials learning that empathy without execution is just a statement to the press.
It is not acceptable for a New Yorker to have to find shelter outside, whether on the Upper West Side or anywhere in this city. New Yorkers should be able to find a place to call their home. And what I have said consistently, first as a candidate, now as the mayor, is that outcomes are how we judge ourselves.
It is not acceptable for a New Yorker to sleep without shelter, whether on the Upper West Side or anywhere else in this city. New Yorkers deserve a place to call home. And what I have maintained consistently, first as a candidate and now as mayor, is that outcomes are how we measure ourselves. That statement sounds reasonable. No one argues with it. Of course people should not be sleeping outside in winter. Of course New Yorkers deserve shelter. The question is not whether the mayor can frame the problem with empathy. The question is whether he can actually solve it without retreating behind slogans, because outcomes are how we measure ourselves is a risky standard when the outcomes are tents on sidewalks, unsafe shelter facilities, and a city budget already pushed to its limit. At some point, leadership is not about saying the morally defensible thing. It is about making a difficult call and standing behind the result.
Mamdani said he would not follow former Mayor Adams' approach of removing the encampments. He wants to take a softer approach, convincing them to come in from the cold.
And there it is, the gentler approach, the persuasion strategy, the maybe if we ask politely enough method. That might read as humane on paper, but what happens when people refuse? What happens when addiction, mental illness, fear, or distrust keeps someone on the street? What happens when the shelter system feels dangerous? What happens when residents are told to simply accept permanent disorder because enforcement feels harsh? This is the clash between compassion and governance. Compassion says, we care. Governance asks, what happens on day 30 when nothing has changed?
I spoke to a man living on the street on the Upper West Side, and I asked him, would you go into supportive housing? Would you, and he said, sure, I would go into supportive housing if somebody would offer it to me.
That clip actually matters because it complicates the easy narratives. Some individuals do want assistance. Some would accept supportive housing. So the answer cannot simply be clear the encampments and move forward. But it also cannot be allow encampments to expand while the city holds listening forums. A serious city requires both. It needs shelter that is safe enough for people to actually choose. It needs treatment when treatment is the appropriate response. It needs enforcement when public spaces become unlivable. And yes, it needs funding, significant funding. Which returns us to the question no one ever answers cleanly. Where does the money actually come from?
Democrats must recognize that Zohran Mamdani is the future of the party. Unfortunately, it's the Republican Party. Get it? And if you missed his victory speech in last week's mayoral election in New York, don't worry. You'll see it in every attack ad for the next 2 years. Now,
that is the political warning shot. Ma is saying Republicans do not even need to fabricate the attack ad. They just need to press play. And that is the real risk for Democrats. If the loudest message connected to the party becomes abolish, sanctuary everything, seize private property, home ownership is racist, and elect more communists, then do not act surprised when swing voters move in the other direction. Politics is not just about what activists intend. It is about what voters actually receive. And what voters are receiving right now is a party entertaining ideas that sound completely disconnected from their everyday lives.
Mamdani seems like a nice guy, and I congratulate him on an extraordinary political achievement. But before the whole left side of the country catches socialism fever, let's listen to the other big winner in last Tuesday's election, Virginia Governor-elect Abigail Spanberger, who, before the 24 election, said things like, if the party didn't shift to the center, we will get torn apart.
That contrast tells the whole story. One wing of the party wants a revolution. The other wing wants to win elections in places that are not activist social media. And Spanberger's warning is straightforward. Move toward the center or get dismantled. That does not mean abandon every progressive priority. It means stop mistaking the loudest voices in the room for the entire country, because America is not a faculty seminar. It is not a nonprofit planning retreat. It is not a group chat in Brooklyn. It is a vast, complicated, skeptical nation full of people who may want change but do not want to be governed by someone else's ideological blueprint. So that is the conclusion. Ma is not simply mocking Mamdani. He is warning Democrats that denial is electoral suicide. Call it socialism, democratic socialism, communism adjacent, whatever label fits, the label matters less than the agenda voters see in front of them. If Democrats want national victories, they have to choose whether they are the party of competent reform or the party of revolutionary branding, because voters can tell the difference. And if the answer is elect more communists, then Republicans will not need a strategy. They will just need a highlight reel. Drop your reaction in the comments. Is Ma right that Democrats are heading toward another political disaster? Or is he overreading a handful of radical voices?